All right, terrific. So I have 20 minutes to describe to you the pension plan systems in Illinois for all of our state and local public employees, where they've been, where they're going, their fiscal situation, the proposals to remedy that, and then also, because some of those involve taxes, I will also describe all of our state and local tax systems in 20 minutes. So I'm going to talk really fast. When we talk about the pension crisis or the pension situation we have in Illinois, it's not one pension. There are hundreds of them when you're talking about all the various public employees we've got in our state. I've listed them out here. They are of different categories of different situations, but the two major indicators that we use or are frequently used to describe the health of a pension plan are either its unfunded liability amount or its funded ratio. And both of those, with one exception, generally speaking, for all of those hundreds of plans, are not good numbers. At the state level, we've got 5 plans. There's the teachers' retirement system, then one for state employees, one for state university employees, one for the judicial employees, and one for the General Assembly. 5 different plans. None of them look terribly good on those two indicators, the unfunded liabilities. There's lots of zeros, and the funded ratio is for all of them under 50%. It's interestingly, the teachers and the state university systems are the state's responsibility, even though while those folks were employed, they were employees of the local school district or the specific state university. But if those systems were, if not enough money was put aside by the employee or their employer while they were employed, those two, those groups are off the hook. It's on the state's dime to make up any differences. It's a big number, it's growing, it's been growing, but that is by design, something that one of you said. I mean, this was part of a big plan, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Where these numbers came from, this is one study that looks at, for the last 20 years, where whose fault is this? And there's a lot of talk, well, the pension benefits are quite generous, and one of the reasons for that is arguably that's because the comp is fairly low. If you're a state or a local government employee, you're maybe not making as much as your friends in the private sector, but boy, you've got a juicy pension. So the story is that's why the pension system is in such disarray or such a problem. This study says, well, it may be so, but the reason it's in negative numbers right now is because the employer contributions were inadequate. That's the biggest bar there. Other reasons are changes in, one is the investment returns weren't as good as they were projecting they were going to be. So as a result, they changed some of the actuarial assumptions about what the future benefits are going to be, and that further added to the unfunded liability, because if you're looking at how much money do I need today to pay later, if suddenly you think your rate of return is less than it was going to be, you now need more. So it's kind of a double whammy. Both they earn less money, and now because they're projecting to earn less money, they are even further in the hole. These are state numbers, again, the 5 state plans put together. The data is very similar for the other groups that I'll be talking about in a minute. I mentioned this as part of a plan. This was designed for many years, decades. There's been a lot of hand-wringing over the state's pension system. And so in the early mid-90s, Governor Edgar was the governor, and Jim Edgar was concerned about this, and so he worked with the legislature to come up with a plan to, by 2045, have the state pension systems be 90% funded. Woohoo! And they created this ramp, and conveniently for the current politicians, the plan was to increase spending very gradually for the first few years while they were all still in office, and then the ramp would require much more bigger increases in the future when other politicians would have to deal, the classic kick the can down the road. So the bottom chart shows how the contributions started out in the mid-90s and then started jacking up over time. These charts are from 2 different groups, which is why they look a little different. One's a very left-leaning group and one's a fairly right-leaning group, and they agree on this, so I think we can trust their data. And the other is forward-looking out to 2045, how the numbers are going to be increasing over and over again, year over year. The funny thing is they don't show 2046, and that's the year that we will have magically achieved that 90% funding, and then the bar would be way down. So, I mean, there is a plan. The plan just is not necessarily a plan that anyone's very happy with because of the fiscal democracy issue. We don't call it fiscal democracy. We call it crowding out in Illinois, but this is what is showing in our general funds, which isn't even the whole budget, but because the other special funds are so completely out of our control that we don't talk about them when we talk about the budget. But when you look at how much pension spending consumes of the state's overall, the general fund's budget, it has been increasing dramatically over time. Projections are that it might not, if the plan stays and we stick with the ramp, This percentage might not go up as dramatically into the future, but it's gone up a lot. We've been crowding out a lot of other spending with the pension needs of this plan that we've had in place. We had a plan for that. So there's a lot of proposals of how to fix this problem, because the crowding out is really starting to bug people. A different governor, Governor Quinn, used to have this little caricature of a snake wrapped around the Capitol dome, and he called it Squeezy the Pension Python. It was kind of juvenile, but he wasn't wrong. It was crowding out our spending. So there's been a lot of proposals. We tried to reduce the benefits. The state Supreme Court said, no, your Constitution says you can't do that, so what it means what it says. But so there's proposals to maybe amend the state constitution. There's potentially a problem with the federal constitution that says when a state has a contract, it has to live up to it. So we might have to amend the federal constitution as well. We can maybe change the ramp, pay more or less, take longer, shift those burdens of the teacher salaries, the teacher pensions back to the school districts. But of course, they all would not be too keen on that. There's lots of politics involved in all of this. So the default is the bottom one right now where we are. Pay up. A pension is a promise. We said we would pay these people, and we've got a ramp in place, and we are just going to have to bite the bullet. And that's where we are right now. There are 9 pension systems for City of Chicago and Cook County employees that are separate from the state ones and separate from, and they also have similar track records on their funded ratios. And again, this is all by design with that ramp. The expectation is for the next 10 years or so, we are going to see higher and higher levels of our unfunded liabilities in these pension plans and lower levels of funded ratios until about 2030 or so. And then things will turn around, and if we follow the plan and and bite the bullet and continue to squeeze or raise revenues or whatever, we'll see things turning around. But it's a little unsettling to see those numbers that are facing us. All right, the most fun one to talk about are the 649 pension plans out there in the state for the local and municipal fire and police employees, not the city clerk and not those other people, just the fire and police. Each municipality can, if it wants, have its very own separate pension plan for their fire and their police. And there's 649 of them. Some of them are very small. Many of them are very small, with under $10 million in assets, and many of them are woefully underfunded. And in fact, more than 10% of them have under 20% funded ratio of assets necessary, or what are actuarially determined to be necessary to fund them. There's, and this kind of reflects on the Ponzi scheme nature of the whole thing. There's these 2 bars show the slight increase over time of the number of retirees whose pensions have to be funded, and the decrease over time of current employees whose current payments into the pension plan, because it's not a 401k, it's not a cash balance kind of a plan, it's a defined benefit plan. So the current employees' pension payments are funding the pensions of the retirees, and it's a bit of there's a squeeze going on there as well. So our current governor created a task force at the beginning of this year. They came out just a few weeks ago with a proposal addressing these specific plans. They've suggested consolidating the investment functions into 2 plans, one for the police, one for the fire, hopefully get better investment returns, save a ton on administrative costs, because they all have their own investment boards that have to get trained for a week up in Lake Geneva every year. That's not cheap. They all have actuaries and accountants and lawyers, and even the ones that combine some of those consolidate or cooperate with each other. It's still pricey, and so the hope is consolidating them would save on those costs. The report also suggests we have anybody who was hired in our state after January 1st, 2011 is what we call a Tier 2 employee. Their benefits are nowhere near as good, we'll just say good, as the people who were hired before that date. And there's always been a little bit of concern about those, and there's a bit of a, part of it's urban legend, but some of it is true, that there needs to be concerned about whether or not those folks run into a safe harbor that applies to the Social Security, because right now public employees are not part of the Social Security plan because they've got this other pension that's good, and the state is able to be exempted from that, and local governments are as well. The concern is Tier 2 people are going to eventually run afoul of the safe harbor there. It may or may not happen anytime soon, but this task force has recommended that we bump up those benefits so that we don't have that issue ever. just for these 649 plans. Now, the concern is that that will spread to the other plans and those other employees, and so we will see a pretty significant uptick in the costs associated with Tier 2 benefits. One bright spot, I said with one exception of how woefully underfunded our public employee pensions are, there is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. These are for the employees of non-Chicago and non-Cook County cities and counties. We call it downstate, even though some of them are north of here, but they, it's just a fun little Illinois thing. Those people are in, if you work for a city or a county, you are employed, your pension is through IMRF. And that, by state law, has to be adequately funded. The cities all have to put in enough money. And so it's at 90%. A lot of the talk has been, can we consolidate some of these other underfunded local funds and pensions into IMRF?
Under a 7% discount rate.
Yes.
Not popping the champagne yet, I don't know.
No, yeah, I mean, there are different ones use different discount rates, and the hope is, see, those plans can have a higher expected rate of return once they leave their little teeny tiny municipal plans and get the benefit of the IMRF economies of scale. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about taxes in my last 5 minutes. And this is to kind of talk about what levers, so if we are stuck in that last option, pay up, a pension is a promise, and we are concerned with the problem, the fiscal democracy problem, and we no longer have ability to fund other government services, what can we do? And well, we look to revenue to make up that difference. Well, how can we raise revenue? It would be very easy if Illinois was like Delaware and didn't have a sales tax and we could just, let's go impose a sales tax. It would not be easy, but that would be a lever we could pull. This chart shows our overall state and local tax pie looks a lot like the typical state tax pie. We have sales tax, we have an individual income tax. There aren't any new taxes we could just go out and plop down and enact and bring in the billions of dollars necessary to fund all the things that we might want to fund, like our pensions. We are also kind of a high-ish tax state. This looks at state and local taxes collected statewide and compares that to the state GDP, the gross state product, and compares that to other states. And we're the two different orange lines because this data predates our most recent income tax hike, and so we've estimated where we would be if the current tax rates were in effect back then. But you can see the US average is green. We're the two different orange lines. We're above average. It doesn't mean we can't raise taxes overall, but it does mean that you reach a certain point where raising taxes is not a real comfortable thing to do if you're already a high tax state. Let's just put it that way. So what revenue options do we have? One is on the board right now. On the table, we will be voting, those of you who vote in Illinois, next November, roughly a year from now, on whether or not to amend our state's constitution. Right now it is written to prohibit the imposition of our income tax on a graduated way. Like the feds do, like most states that have an individual income tax, they have some sort of graduated bracket type structure. We don't because we can't. If the Constitution is amended, then we can, and in fact there's a law already been enacted that says if the Constitution gets amended effective January 1st, 2021, we're going to have this new graduated rate structure. It's going to raise, they estimate, about $3 billion of extra revenue every year, only on the top 3% of Illinois taxpayers. So, stick it to the man is the general gist of the political messaging behind it. The messaging against it is, do you really trust them? Other levers we could pull, we don't tax services in Illinois by compared to most other states. Some states at least tinker with a few services they subject to tax. We don't. So you could bring in some money that way. It's difficult to do, politically difficult to do. And we don't tax retirement income. We're talking about pension money. The federal government doesn't tax it while you're earning it, but except for Social Security, once you take money out of your 401k, once you're starting to earn a pension, the feds tax that income. Most states also tax that income. Illinois exempts it all. You can be rich as Croesus, and if all the money you're earning is coming out of a 401k, you are not going to pay a penny of Illinois income tax. So stay here when you retire because you won't be paying income tax unless we change the law and bring in a few billion extra dollars a year. But right now you can be rich, you can be young, you can retire at 50, and you'll be fine as far as Illinois income tax goes. Like I said, old people vote, and so nobody likes that idea, but from a policy perspective, it's out there. We talk a lot about if we raise taxes, will people leave? And we don't know for sure. We do know that people are leaving Illinois already. It's a trend that seems to be accelerating recently. When you look at domestic migration, Illinois has been an out-migration state for many decades. but international immigration and just natural growth have offset that. And those two have slowed down, and the domestic out-migration has picked up. And so on whole, we're starting to lose people. We don't know why, though. And there are occasional studies that look at if you raise taxes, do people leave or not? And a good one recently out of California. But we don't know if that will really work in Illinois. I mean, will it happen in Illinois the same way as it happened in California? We don't know. And you know, their tax hike went to 13%. All we're talking about is going to 8%. So does that matter? I don't know. And there's always anecdotal talk about, oh, everybody wants to leave and everybody wants to go somewhere. And my response is always, well, where are they moving to? And it's usually Florida. And my answer was, if they really were moving for tax purposes, they would be moving to Alaska. Because if you are going to be an individual and you want to move for tax purposes, that's the best state to live. And nobody goes there. So I'm not sure taxes is always the motivating factor for the move. Local governments also have different levers. They could ask for more state support, but since the state is also having the same fiscal squeeze, I don't know that that's going to be very helpful. Local governments can raise sales taxes in many instances, and they can also raise property taxes. I've got a few slides here. Our sales tax rate is already in our state, when you add in the local taxes, one of the highest in the country. Oddly enough, our collections are below average, and that's partly because we don't tax services. It's not because people are cheating. Amazon's collecting tax. It's not any of that kind of stuff going on. We don't tax services, and we impose a lot of excise taxes. And when you add the two together, we're much closer to the national average. Property taxes, though, I have no two different, this is high and this is low. Everything's high. Statewide, when you're looking at property taxes, collections are high, the average rate is high. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at commercial or residential. It's high. That doesn't mean they can't raise it, but again, there is that pressure. If you raise taxes, it's politically not very popular. The last slide I had, we were just talking about the number of local governments and how there were those 649 pension plans and all the property taxes and sales taxes. In Illinois, we have more local governments than any other state. So yay, number one. This is just the ones who impose property taxes. I've got two different charts here. The bottom one, the bright green dot, is how much revenue is brought in by these various types of taxing jurisdictions. And the bright green one is school districts. The top slide, though, is by count. So we have 892 school districts, I think it is, 895. We have 102 counties. So school districts bring in the bulk of the property tax revenue, even though they don't have to, and it's not going towards pensions because they don't have to pay for the backlog of unpaid pension liabilities. The other jurisdictions that are out there are nowhere near as big a property tax generating. And this, of course, doesn't count the types of local jurisdictions that don't collect property taxes, and we have a lot of those. That was just my last little slide, and now I think I'm turning it over to Byron. Now